today's video. Today's review will be of the Gemini 200 series rendition of the Airbus A319. This is a 111-foot/39-meter passenger aircraft with 124-seat capacity. Wouldn't go so far as to call this airplane little, but apparently it is considered a tiny guy in the world of airliners in general. And I guess when you compare this to certain aircraft like the Airbus A380 or the Boeing 747, I suppose maybe those folks have a point. As somebody who's flown on one of these a time or two, I can say that, at least to me, this ain't small, even in the category of airliners in general. So today's video, in line with the goal of the channel, we're going to look at some history of the A319 and then review the pros and cons of the Gemini 200 rendition. And hopefully today's video is going to answer the question of whether it's worthwhile to add this little quote-unquote airplane to your collection. So on my channel, I like to review the history of the airplane in question, as I believe it tells the story of the people who are involved in aviation who don't necessarily always get the limelight. Hollywood, of course, focuses on the daring do of the pilots and the front end crew, but we don't see the stories of the people who design, build, support, and maintain these aircraft. And without that army of people behind the scenes who make the airplanes we fly and in some cases cherish and love happen, without that teamwork, you don't have anything. You don't have an airport, you don't have an airplane, you don't have an airline, you don't have military aviation, you don't have any of it. So to take a moment to highlight the historical background of these models and to really give the credit, at least a part of the credit that is due to those folks, we're going to look into the history of how these airplanes happen. And to that end, we'll look at the A319 story, which began in, of all years, 1967. Yeah, it's a long time ago, folks. I didn't realize this jet had a story that went all the way back to the Bee Gees and before, but here we are. So in 1967, aircraft makers in the United Kingdom, France, and the country known at the time as West Germany came together to sign an agreement on collaborating to build a new airliner. The Pan-European consortium would be called the Airbus Company and officially formed on December 18th, 1970. Now their mandate was to build a pan-European constructed airliner which would compete with the industry titans of Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, and Lockheed, all of which were based in the United States. Less than a year after that agreement was signed, the Airbus A300 airliner prototype took to the skies. Now, the Airbus A300 would go on to compete with established companies that I mentioned before, but even as the A300 took to the skies, Airbus leadership knew that there were more areas to conquer in the marketplace. The next targets were the stalwart Boeing 737 and the popular McDonnell Douglas DC-9. To that end, in 1980, Airbus acquired the Joint European Transport or JET prototype program and applied that design work into an aircraft which would eventually become the Airbus A320. Airbus, as part of this project, also collaborated with Delta Airlines, which at that time was a much smaller aviation concern and not the international behemoth we know it as now, and worked together to build a 150-seat aircraft. After years and about $8 billion of investment capital, the first Airbus A320 took to the skies on 22 February 1987. It's a good year. After the main A320 gained commercial success in the airline market, Airbus revisited the proposal to challenge the Boeing 737-700. The A320's airframe was reduced by 3.7 meters by removing 4 fuselage frames ahead of and 3 fuselage frames aft of the wings. And those areas generally correspond to the sections of the fuselage right about here for the frames ahead, and then behind the wing for the frames after. So the cargo door and the overwing exits were changed, and the fly-by-wire flight control structure was also modified to accommodate the different handling of the smaller variant of the A320 versus the original aircraft. This newly configured variant would be dubbed the A319, with most other engineering aspects similar to the A320. It succeeded in some ways in the smaller market. The A319 was launched on 10 June 1993, with the first flight happening August 25th, 1995. European airliner Swiss Air was the launch customer of the A319, taking delivery of the first example in April 1966. The A319 later set a record on a delivery flight, flying from Winnipeg, Canada to Hamburg, Germany in 9 hours and 25 minutes. Unfortunately, that wasn't a revenue flight, so unfortunately we don't have teams of passengers who can attest to participating in that, but that is still quite an accomplishment for such a quote-unquote little airliner. So Gemini jets, modeled registration number November 371 November Bravo, which first flew in November 19th, 2003. That particular aircraft's been in service since then continuously, with its first owner being Northwest Airlines until December of 2009, when Delta purchased Northwest Airlines. At that time, they took ownership of the aircraft, and at the time of this video, they still operate this aircraft. So let's cover the pros and cons of the model. So the pros first, we'll look at the paint quality, which to me looks fairly good, especially for a design in 1/200 scale. Some of the detail in the small paint parts, like the Delta insignia on the side, as well as the Sky Team logo by the boarding door, as well as the boarding door specifics and the handle actuators and all that. Even like the little the running light over there, and the small labels, and then the evacuation door, as well as the non-step verbiage on the wings. All that stuff is done very crisply. There's no sign of it being washed out or hard to read or poorly detailed, and I'm really glad to see that that's rendered so well in this scale. The good proportions, the overall shape of the A319 is very close to the actual article, and I can thankfully say that having seen one with my own two eyes, this model is pretty close. The shape of the nose isn't weird, the windows aren't misproportioned, everything is in balance in terms of what you would expect it to look like at 1/200 scale. None of the parts are oversized or undersized, and everything looks with what you would consistently see of a model of this type. In fact, maybe a little bit better detail. This wouldn't look too bad if it were a 1/72 scale iteration, much less the 1/200 model we see here. Even the vortex generators that you see on the sides of the engines are modeled as well, and then the thrust reversers, which you can actually see being deployed on an A319 in real life. If you looked at the intro footage of this video, which I shot on my last flight on one of these, in Delta colors too, funny enough. So if you want to see how those work, just scroll back to the start and you can see that thrust reverser in action. So it's all rendered really well here, and I'm glad to share that the compressor face is also done fairly well. So you can see the front of the compressor when you're looking head on at the model, which is a really nice presentation, and I'm glad to share that here. So all things considered, I think it's done fairly well, and Gemini deserves quite a bit of praise for how they have implemented the setup for this model, especially again how they rendered the compressor faces of the engines, which on this particular one are CFM 56. The other benefit I want to point out too is how the running lights and the antenna are done really nicely, and the antenna are accurately rendered. So again, it's not oversized or undersized. It is what you would expect them to look like. And then not only are the communications antennas done really well, they're also not so narrow and sharp that they hurt your fingers when you handle the model. So that's a plus in my book. Also, the wireless internet satellite antenna is rendered very accurately on the back there too. So again, all in all, really good job on Gemini's part putting those details together and making this model look really nice for something in 1/200 scale. The downsides, the first downside I'll point out is that the model out of the box comes with fixed landing gear. Well, kind of, sort of. When I opened the box, the left one just kind of fell off the model. So as it turned out, I had planned on removing the landing gear and making it displayed in flight with the gear off anyway, because I just personally think that's a little bit more accurate presentation anyway. And Gemini makes the landing gear detachable on some of their larger 1/200 offerings, and I know it's tough to do sometimes because you have to mass produce it, and the smaller the airplane model, the harder that gets. So I do understand why that would be a challenge, but I think it's worthwhile for Gemini to put removable landing gear on their 1/200 scale smaller airplanes like the regional jets, like the CRJs, the ERJs, and they do it on their 737 800, so why not do it on their A319s and other smaller airplanes? I'd like to see them roll that in on all of their models. What do you all think? Tell me, would you all like to see some interchangeable landing gear integrated onto the smaller models in the 1/200 scale, or do you all prefer the way Gemini does it, where you have to step up to some of their larger offerings to get those features? So let me know what you all think about that in the comments. Personally, I would like to see all of them have detachable landing gear, and if that means paying an additional $10 for the model, $5 or $10, so be it. Quality isn't free, right? So with those points laid out, I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons, and I think this A319 deserves a place in your collection if you're a fan of Airbus or of Delta's varieties, or if you, as I have flown the A319 and have some fond memories attached to it. For me, it was on one of these A319s that I concluded a really good trip with my new partner, and she invited me to go see her sister out on the other side of the country, and it was a really positive and amazing trip for me. So the A319 that I flew coming back from there involved a connection through New York, which parts of which you got to see in the intro footage of this video. All that intro footage you saw, I shot from my seat on an A319 leaving JFK. So it's got some personal relevance to me, and I'm glad to share a little bit of that trip with you all. And even if you're not a big fan of New York City or Airbus, I think even if you're a diehard Boeing fan, you should still make a little bit of room on your shelf for this one, because the A319 just looks cool. And just because it's utilitarian and it's everywhere, utilitarian, I should say, and it's everywhere. It's all our airports all over the world. Thousands of them have been made, and the A320 series is about to overtake the 737 in terms of overall productivity and how many have been built. So they're common. But just because something's common and stalwart and reliable doesn't mean we should take it for granted. And I think that's worthwhile to note in the A319's case. Thank you all for joining me on today's video. Leave your thoughts and comments in the appropriate comment section. And if you like these videos, consider subscribing. That'll be your way of telling me that I'm doing a good job here and I should make some more. That's your way of telling the algorithm I'm doing a good job and to keep funneling viewers to my channel. And that'll also give you the opportunity to be notified when I release new content. So I intend to publish some more video reviews of various civilian die-cast models in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for more. I will catch you all in the next video.